Thank you very much, honorable senators. We are back. We're pleased to welcome with us for our second panel today the Honorable François-Philippe Champagne, Minister of Finance and National Revenue. He is joined by Mr. Nick Lewick, Deputy Minister, Department of Finance. Minister, I was told that you would like to speak for about 5 to 6 minutes, and then we will move on to our questions. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, colleagues, for having invited me to appear this morning. As you know, last fall, I had the honor of introducing the 2025 budget, which outlined our ambitious plan to build on Canada's many strengths and address the challenges of these exceptional times. In fact, we are living an exceptional time in the history of the world. Bill C-15, or Budget Implementation Act, is the main legislative instrument for implementing this program. And I am pleased to welcome and to thank all of our senators for all of the work that you have accomplished regarding the study on this bill. Thank you for having conducted such a detailed study. I'm told that there have been many witnesses, several meetings as well. I'd like to say that Canadians expect that each one of us act quickly and in a serious fashion, given the circumstances that we find ourselves in the world economy. And I am pleased to join you today to provide a brief overview of his key measures, because we have only a few minutes that allow only for a brief overview of a generational plan and to underscore the highlights contained in the budget.
Rule-based order that kept Canada prosperous for decades, our government is embracing the world as it is and not as we wish it to be. And with that comes new opportunities to fundamentally shift how we trade, how we influence, and how we build strength at home. When I was with the Prime Minister just recently abroad, we always say strong at home and strategic abroad. And that's really what you see in the budget. Quite simply, Canada has what the world needs. And I can assure you, coming from various missions, the world wants what Canada has to offer. We have an abundance of both conventional and clean energy. We have a highly educated workforce. You represent different regions of the country, you would know that. We have well-established diplomatic relationships that span the entire world. We offer peace, order, and good governance. We have the fiscal firepower, was restated again by the IMF recently, and the ability to unlock generational investments that will help create good-paying jobs and build a prosperous economy for decades to come. Pour relever les défis de notre époque, le budget de...
To meet the challenges of our time, Budget 2025 presents a historic investment strategy that protects and transforms our industries, strengthens our economy, and empowers Canadians. Our government is committed to delivering big projects for Canadians on a scale and at a pace not seen in generations. Whether it's housing, infrastructure, defense, productivity, or competitiveness, our plan puts Canadian workers at the heart of the action and the national interest at the center of every single decision. It is also a plan to defend our sovereignty through historic investments in national defense, security, and the capabilities we need to protect Canadians and certainly to ensure our sovereignty in the Canadian North.
Budget 2025. And by extension, the Budget Implementation Act that I am here this morning to present with our Deputy Minister is the plan for our country to leverage these invaluable assets, shape our economy, and secure our future. It's, in other words, the right plan at the right time. Afin de stimuler les investissements dans la recherche et le développement.
To stimulate investment in research and development, Bill C-15 will strengthen tax incentives for scientific research and experimental development. We are doubling the limit on eligible expenses for the enhanced credit from $3 million to $6 million, while expanding eligibility to Canadian SMEs and reinstating capital expenditures as eligible costs. This measure will be combined with a super deduction for productivity, which will reduce Canada's marginal effective tax rate by more than 2 percentage points. As a result, Canada will become the G7 countries that offers the most competitive tax rate for new investments made by companies. As a result, businesses will be able to invest and grow more easily. This sends a clear signal to investors that Canada is the destination of choice for growth and that it is one of the best places in the world to invest. And I can guarantee you, dear senators, that after having met with funds in Australia and in India, is that the world is looking towards Canada in a very uncertain world. To ensure the success and prosperity of the Canadian economy, we know that the key to long-term competitiveness and growth also lies in being a leader in low-carbon economies. Our government's climate competitive strategy proposed by our government in the budget 2025 will stimulate the investments required for Canadian businesses to be competitive and, most importantly, allowing them to be prosperous in a carbon-neutral future, as net zero future. As part of the strategy, Bill C-15 includes measures to introduce the Clean Electricity Investment Tax Credit to support clean electricity and grid technologies, as well as enhance the existing suite of clean economy investment tax credits.
Many strengths to build a strong and resilient economy. We're also focused on making our economy fairer for all Canadians, no matter their circumstances, through important tax reforms. Bill C-15 introduced targeted reforms to support those who power our economy and our communities. As an example, Bill C-15 will both exempt the Canada Disability Benefit from income calculations and expand the disability supports deduction. Bill C-15 will also introduce something I'm very proud, and I'm sure you would be as well, a temporary tax credit for personal support workers, which will provide up to $1,100 per year to eligible workers across the nation, tangibly recognizing their vital contribution to our communities. We've seen it in COVID-19, but we should always remember they play a vital role in our communities. While unlocking investment that will help build the strongest economy in the G7, that's our North Star, we are also putting in place more targeted measures to help immediately Canadians. Mr. Chair, to keep our financial sector at the cutting edge, Bill C-15 will advance the government's commitment to open banking. I think something, Mr. Chair, you are very open to looking at for sure. By completing the consumer-driven banking framework, we are giving Canadians more choices, lower costs, and greater control over their own financial data. Afin de pouvoir réaliser tous ces
In order to make all these essential investments in our workers, businesses, and infrastructure, our government is reducing administrative costs for the public service. To achieve this, we are simplifying administrative procedures and are adopting AI on a large scale.
As part of our comprehensive expenditure review, primarily through attrition and voluntary departures. These efforts will save Canada $13 billion annually by 2028-29. Combined with other savings and revenue, this represents $60 billion over 5 years, ensuring a more efficient, productive, and effective public service. In conclusion, taken together, these measures contained in Budget 2025 and C-15 are part of one single vision for the Canadian economy, one rooted in confidence in our country, confidence in Canadians. By making these generational investments today, we are securing the prosperity of Canadians for decades to come because we believe in Canadians and the extraordinary opportunities that Canada offers to each and every one of us. With that, Mr. Chair, I'll be more than happy to answer questions from colleagues.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre. On va commencer.
Thank you very much, Minister. We will begin with our question period. A reminder for our senators on our minister that each senator has 4 minutes, including the question and the answer delivered by the minister. So, Senator Marshall.
Being here, and also to your Deputy Minister. I wanted to talk about Division 38, Part 5, and your request for an increase in the debt ceiling of $2 to $2.5 trillion. So it was already increased $300 billion just 18 months ago, and now you're asking for approval to increase that limit by another $400 billion. And actually, your debt next year, if you don't get the increase, it's pushing up against your current ceiling, and it's eating into your $100 billion buffer. So you're really very, very tight there with regard to your borrowing. So your spending's accelerating. Your debt servicing costs are increasing. Your debt's exploding. And your financial projections aren't credible. So my question is, how are you going to bring your spending under control?
Well, Madam Senator, first of all, thank you for the question. I would just say maybe a few people in the world might disagree with how you portray Canada's finance. I wish you would be at the G7 meetings like I attend, because colleagues would really want to be in Canada's position, I can assure you. Canada has the lowest net debt to GDP ratio, has a AAA credit rating, and there's only Germany in that position with Canada. Canada has been applauded. You may have seen at the last IMF meeting, the Director General singled out 2 countries in the world, not 5, not 10, 2. She said there's really 2 countries in the world in the G7 who have the fiscal power to make generational investments. And if you look at the plan of Canada and the one of Germany, you will see similarities in that. You know, the German plan is seen as the mother of all infrastructure plan in the G7. They invest in housing, infrastructure, competitiveness, and defense. You'll see that Canada, if you compare that to the German plan, actually is a more ambitious plan to invest in infrastructure.
But I'm using your numbers, Minister, and your financial projections aren't credible. I'm using the numbers you're providing.
I may have a slightly different view than you, Senator, on that, and I would say even former parliamentary budget officers have praised the sustainability of the finance of Canada. Like I said, when you're blessed with a AAA credit rating in the G7, when you have the lowest net to GDP debt, when you have one of the lowest deficit to GDP, I can assure you, Senator, I really wish you would be with me on this call, because you would see how much colleagues are looking to Canada as a place, as the North Star with respect to governance, to our finance, to our strategic investments. And it's not just me. Just look at the market. You and I may disagree, but one thing that we may not disagree is that the market has confidence in Canada, because that speaks for itself. The market has confidence.
Can I ask one follow-up question? Are you telling us here today that you aren't going to do anything with regard to trying to control your spending, trying to control the debt, trying to control the debt servicing? Are you saying that, no, we're well and away, let's keep going?
No, I would say, Senator, I'm sure you will have seen in the budget that what we have achieved, $60 billion of saving, is really, if you compare that to what Prime Minister Mulroney did at the time and Prime Minister Chrétien did at the time, it is comparable. It has a scale that you would see previous government have done.
But, Minister,
do you want me to continue?
The savings haven't materialized yet, and I doubt very, very much if those savings are going to materialize.
I have more faith in Canadians than you have, Madam Senators. I have more faith in Canadians. Canadians are people who are able to meet the moment. Canadians understand, the people you represent and I represent understand we live in a very uncertain world. The events of the last few days have just highlighted that. The world is praising Canada for its governance, for its fiscal sustainability, for our ability to do things. We're a nation who do big things. And I would have more faith in our civil service, perhaps, than you express, in terms of their ability to deliver the savings that we have identified. I have faith in people.
Not the civil servants. You're the Minister of Finance.
Sorry, Senator Marshall. Senator Forêt.
Senator Forêt, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, and thank you very much for your willingness to develop an efficient and organization, and that would like to work with all of its stakeholders. My question is this: Bill C-15 amends the Consumer-Focused Banking Act, and that was on 24th of April 2024. And 19th of February there, you wrote to raise major issues. This regulatory change will have an impact on the jurisdiction of Quebec. It actually contravenes the provisions of Quebec because these companies would not be able to comply with 207 of the rules. Have there been consultations? Has any work been undertaken in order to harmonize this legislation, which I believe that when you're speaking about efficiency means that we need to have the most efficient legislation possible. Thank you, Senator. You're raising an important point, and I'm working with Minister Girard. I work hand in hand with my colleague who's exceptional. In fact, he wrote to me on last 19th of February. And we took into account Quebec's position. In fact, we clarified, as you will have seen in the amendments made to Bill 15, a specific amendment in order to clearly express the legislator's intent to maintain the prerogatives of the Quebec's government and Quebec legislation. And I believe that we do want a national framework, but all the while respecting the jurisdiction of Quebec. And not only have we expressed this, but you will have seen in C-15 that an amendment was moved and that was passed in committee previously, just to make sure that we clarify this position very clearly. Thank you. Because in Quebec, when it comes to various responsibility, there's nothing that allows Quebec to see that the rules are harmonized and it speaks to applicable civil responsibility, the one under the Consumer Protection Act, that P30 regarding the deposit accounts. I understand that harmonization work has yet to be conducted. Are you continuing these negotiations on this level with the province of Quebec? Well, thank you for raising this. So, as you know, federal-provincial relations have undergone a historic shift. We're working hand in hand together. The number of federal-provincial meetings we've had, both with the Prime Minister, with the ministers of the provinces, finance ministers, and others, is unprecedented. People now expect that we work hand in hand, and that is exactly what we're doing. In the case of Quebec, not only have we taken seriously the concerns raised by Quebec there with respect to the civil service, but there was this amendment that was passed in order to clearly express in the act the legislators intend to respect the jurisdictions of the government of Quebec. But the said, we continue working hand in hand with our Quebec counterparts and with the other provinces. If I may, I would like to table Minister Ménard's letter and to continue so that we can continue focusing on this. Thank you very much, Senator Hay.
Minister, nice to see you. I do love the North Star, that is for sure. I do want to focus, though, today on what you said, stronger at home. And Budget 2025 highlights investments in innovation and emerging technologies and artificial intelligence, which is terrific. And Canada was a global leader in AI research and talent, supported by the Pan-Canadian AI strategy. But many stakeholders, many people, startups in Canada note that we still struggle to scale companies and infrastructure domestically and keep the companies in Canada once they begin to scale and thrive. So I guess my question is, Minister, what is Canada's play-to-win strategy to ensure the Budget 2025 help Canadian companies scale here at home, translate our leadership into long-term economic growth right here in Canada? And then globally?
That's a very good question, Senator, and I'm glad that you're highlighting that because, productivity and competitiveness has been at the heart of the Canadian public debate since I've been able to write and read. And that would go a few decades ago. We've been talking about that. That's why in Budget 2025, we've doubled down on that because we know that this is ensuring the prosperity of the country. I would note that the productivity superdeduction, for example, is one of the key elements that we've put to incentivize Canadian companies to invest more. We have a suite of products and I would say tools in a toolbox to support innovation. You're quite right. Canadians should know because there are many Canadians watching at home, but in many ways, AI has been invented in Canada. I mean, we have two of the global leaders in AI, which receive Nobel Prize for their work. So, but you're right. That initial, science and research has migrated into commercialization in other places. Now, how do we how do we go better from the idea to the product, and the commercialization of that is something that we're addressing. Clearly, the suite of tax credit we provide is probably the most generous in the G7. Like I said, the marginal effective tax rate in Canada now for new investment is the lowest in the G7, lower than in the United States after the One Big Beautiful Bill. It's about 3-4% lower. So Canada is one of the most attractive jurisdictions. And at the same time, you remember when I was Minister of Industry, we did a big push to support our fundamental research and applied research in the country, to the granting councils and the work we've been doing, because our universities are among the top in the world. And one of the strengths of Canada is the talented workforce we have. We have the most educated workforce in the world. And that gives us an edge in the economy of the 21st century when talent is king. Resources will be important, energy will be important, but people are key to all that. And therefore, to your point, we've been working and we've been trying also to champion, something that Canada has not been doing enough, in my view, is to champion our Canadian companies. When we have missions abroad, we make a point to champion our Canadian companies so that the world can discover them. I think about the Courier of the World, for example, in AI, the Xanadu in quantum, Coveo, for example. There's a number of companies which are flagship, CGI, companies which are flagship in not only in our country but around the world, and we've been making a point to really showcase them around the world and to help them to build partnerships.
Thank you. Senator Russ.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for joining us at our committee today. Recently, this committee has been studying the use of large omnibus bills to include non-financial matters in bills like the BIA. And although we're here to discuss C-15, which does include many non-financial matters, I also draw your attention to the recent bill C-4 on affordability, which included the unrelated Part 4. Is this a practice that you plan to continue, and can you help us understand why this has been the practice?
I'll comment on two things. First, I would appreciate that the operations of government are more complex today than they have been in the past, in the sense that when you have a legislative vehicle, you have to use it to the best extent possible. I appreciate your concern. I've been a member of Parliament for 10 years, so I've seen different versions of that. With respect to C-4, Part 4, this was just to clarify the intent of the House. The House has been clear many, many times about what the House intends in a unanimous fashion to clarify the state of law in the country. And therefore, that's why in C-4 there was a Part 4, because that was the unanimous desire of every member of Parliament to clarify that there would be one single framework around the country when it comes to privacy and election. And the House has been expressing its will in a very clear way. And I think providing legal clarity, because you avoid then litigation when you provide clarity when the legislature is very clear on that. And I think we've been unanimous to say what is the intent of the legislature with respect to Part 4 of C-4.
So given that response, I guess my question is really about, do you plan to continue to bring things that are not related to a specific bill? And in that instance, perhaps that could have been a separate bill or brought up with something that it was related to, like the privacy bill that we've been hearing will be forthcoming. So moving forward, what is your intent?
Well, again, on C-4, I've been a member of Parliament for 10 years. It's rare you have unanimity in the House. Trust me, I've not seen that very, very often. That must send a very strong signal to Canadians and to everyone else that when the House is unanimous, no single member has objected to that, is sending a very strong signal about the will of Parliament with respect to that. So if you're talking about C-4...
my question really is, do you plan to continue to add non-financial matters into financial bills?
I said I'm very conscious of the omnibus nature of these things. Like I said, the operation of governments are complex. Some of the time we need to use the legislative vehicle to achieve the intended purpose. I would say the state of the world today requires us to act swiftly to protect Canadians, to protect our sovereignty, to protect our interests. And I can assure you, every time that something is in the bill, it's always in the public interest to defend, empower, and build for Canada. Canadians expect us for us to act very quickly. The state of the world requires us to be very acting with eyes wide open and seriousness and swiftly in many ways to protect Canadians. If you see in the bill, there's a number of things that will just make Canada more competitive. And in a world like that, I think Canadians, if you and I were to go on the street and ask Canadians, they expect us to use smartly, wisely, seriously the legislative vehicle we have to further their interest in a world which is fast changing.
Do I have more time, Chair?
No, merci.
If
Je
there is a round
m'excuse.
two.
Sorry, I'm very tough. Senator Gignac.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bonjour, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome, Minister. And Deputy Minister, welcome. At Senatorial Banking Committee that I chair, we looked at certain sections of C-15 that regard the banking services. The members of the committee in general looked at this new bill, and we encourage you to go forward. But as my colleague Senator Ford has mentioned, the government of Quebec, there, the Minister of Finance, sent you a letter indicating that there was some pain points, to be polite, regarding these changes. But we received this letter once we had completed our work in committee. And you spoke about the privacy protection bill. But what about the processing of complaints? They have jurisdiction there, and we are afraid that the AMF has jurisdiction over this, and we're afraid of overlap. Is there anything that you could speak to with respect to this amendment? Well, thank you very much, Senator Gignac, for all of the work that you do as an economist, also as chair of the Bank Committee. That is so important. As I say, we work hand in hand. There were years where there were conflicts between the federal government and Quebec are behind us. We are working in a collaborative fashion. We work strategically also. The Minister of Finance of Quebec, as I do, realizes what kind of world we are living in at this time and the willingness that we both have to work hand in hand. I can state that we have constant discussions. We very much took seriously the content of the letter. As you indicated, there was an amendment. Now, regarding the complaints, we're open to the viewpoints shared by the government of Quebec as to this, and we'll have an opportunity to discuss this because there will be a meeting of the federal, provincial finance ministers scheduled shortly, if memory serves. And we want to ensure that the federal legislation will be well aligned on the Quebec laws. And we also recognize the jurisdiction of Quebec expressly in the Act, because I believe that that was the desire, not only that we express this publicly, but that we also specifically integrate this into the Act, and that is why we brought an amendment to Bill C-15. Do I have time for a second question? 1 minute. Minister, let's move on to another topic. In our committee, we also had an opportunity to ensure that regarding the First Nations financial authorities, and the bill provides new authorities to the Indigenous nations. However, there's nothing in Bill 15 to that effect that provides additional powers to Indigenous organizations in this bill. My question is this: when can we expect that the Indigenous Corporations Act to be amended, that you do exactly what you're saying to do? Because currently there's nothing in the Act that gives power to this. And I think Senator Ross put a question to that earlier. Let me come back to that. It is the Budget Implementation Act, number 1. There will be a second version, as you know. There will be a number of things that will be put forward, that is, bills regarding the application of the provisions provided for in a budget. Certainly, the intent is clearly outlined in the 2025 budget, but as you said, the application will come. And that is also part of the consultations, because when we speak about the First Nations, we have always committed, both in the House as in the Senate, to bringing forth the voices of the First Nations when it comes to the implementation of the objectives that we jointly develop with them. And that will be present in the next version of the legislation we will be tabling. Thank you, Senator Galvez.
Champagne.
Thank you, Minister Champagne. Thank you very much for being here to answer our questions.
Wide open. But it's not enough to read that 600 pages. And so we had to follow what your chamber was doing with the budget. So we know that you had some pressure in order to make amendments with respect to the Le Carré de Sable and tape reduction. And so now you have 13 laws that are listed there. However, there are two very, very important laws that are not in this list, which is the Canada Labour Code and the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. So how are you going to ensure that the rights and freedoms necessary to protect workers and also the environment? Because as you said, a healthy environment is the basic for a healthy and sustainable economy. So who will the minister consult? How this will? Very short, I have another question.
Sure. Well, that's a very good question. The chair would have said we spend a lot of time on guardrails with respect to the what we call regulatory sandbox. I had to inform my colleague of the House, by the way, this is not something new. This exists in all G7 countries. We're just catching up with the OECD. So there's been a lot of discussion, but just so we're clear, I have a list of all the countries who have similar framework, which is based on the OECD report. This is something that has been existing for a long time. We were just trying to upgrade, remove some of the red tape, but we have accepted that the colleagues in the opposition wanted to put more guardrails. We have listed a number of them. But I just want to just very, very clear to Canadians, one of them, these exemptions would be for very, 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 very limited sector. We talk about clean technology and financial technology. And then you have to go to, you have a number of guardrails. And specifically, we have listed a number of acts that would still apply. This is not, I would say, necessarily an exhaustive list. Obviously, the minister will have to use good judgment when it applies these very limited, exception. And just so you know, this was an ask by the innovators in Canada. This was an ask by people who say, allow us to be competitive when we compare to other jurisdictions. Because if they don't do it here, they'll do it somewhere else.
Thank you so much. Yes, that gives me a segue for my second question. So we have our Prime Minister going around the world bringing some investment. So we all agree that we need more competitiveness, we need more productivity, and we need more innovation and to scale up this innovation. But in the budget, this innovation, this productivity, this competitiveness is searched and looked and supported in a sector that is sunsetting. That the productivity, the innovation is now in the transition into electrification, into low-carbon economy. And so the other part of the question is, why are we not asking our big financial institutions, the pension plans and the banks and the insurance, to contribute more to this transition?
That's a very. I think they will, Senator. I can tell you, coming back from meetings with what they call the Super, which is also the pension fund in Australia, there is a lot of desire to be part. And Canada has the most extensive suite of clean economy tax credits, and this is not lost on them. They realize that an investment in Canada, whether it's about the clean technology investment tax credit, the clean electricity, the clean hydrogen ITCs. I mean, we have a suite of tax credit that really make Canada the best place to invest in the world when you want to be part of the new economy.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Senator Dalphond.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Dalphond. Thank you, Minister, for being with us today. I have two connected questions because their impact is the same. The idea is to rewrite history and to reduce rates in C-4 and C-15. Under Section 19, I'm specifically interested in the situation of our veterans who are entitled to reimbursements for care. and they are calculated on the lowest rate in a given province in Canada. And the definition of province, according to the Interpretation Act, is to include the territories. And yet, there is an intent to amend the law to say that these are not territories in order to end a collective suit, a class action suit, to have veterans be reimbursed for amounts that they were not paid if you use the scale currently in effect. And this will be proactively applied according to sections that goes all the way to 1998. So the ombudsperson for veterans apparently invited you and said to the government in writing, say that this is not equitable, do not do this. Why is it that the government is not being attentive to the veterans' demands, and how many millions of dollars are involved? Well, first of all, I think all Canadians, and especially members of parliament and senators, have a great deal of respect for all of those who have served in uniforms, our veterans, and those who serve in our Canadian Armed Forces. What we're doing is clarify the legislator's intent. As a lawyer, I think that legally speaking, we must always attempt to clarify the legislator's intent to avoid lawsuits. The legislator's intent has always to ensure that the definition of provinces include the provinces in this case. That is also how it was applied by the department. So I believe that we are focusing on legal stability, on clarifying the legislator's intent, because there's the Interpretation Act, that's one thing, but there is legislator's intent. And what we're saying here is that it has always been the intent. We're telling the courts, note that the legislator's intent has always been that this be limited to the province. That was the legislator's intent at the time. It is currently the same intent, and we're clarifying it. This sends a clear message. And I think to remove legal uncertainty is always a desirable outcome. Well, if I may interrupt you, but the net result is that you're saying we made a mistake in our calculations, we didn't properly interpret the act at the time, and you're suing us, but we're the defenders, and now we will simply amend the act, and you will not be right. And that's not fair to Canadians, saying that if there's a mistake in the act and if we have not properly done our work and we're suing the government for wrongly having paid out amounts, we can change this. But why go all the way back to 1998? Well, I would say that your choice of words, and I'm speaking from a legal standpoint, it was that it was not a mistake. That was the intent, the interpretation, and the application of the legislator. And I think we need to turn to the legislator in this case. And I think legal predictability is always desirable when it comes to interpretation. What we're saying is that that is how the legislator has drafted it, is that how they applied it, and how the intent was expressed. This clarifies the issue for all of the courts to say that this was the legislator's intent at the time, and we are restating it today, just as we have done under C-4. Yes, but under C-4, I think we all agree to have a national programs and that it will not be up to the provinces to determine how political parties work. But why can the government not commit that shortly these political parties will see a privacy protection regime, will specifically focus on them? 2 seconds, answer please. Chair, in 2 seconds, I can't render justice to Senator Alphonse's comment. And that's an important issue he's raising. Under C-4, I think there were representations made indicating that, yes, we want a national regime which will protect privacy, but that it is in the national interest that we have a single regime, then one for each province and territory. I think that was the underlying intent. Senator Deakin.
Chair, and thank you, Minister and Deputy, for being with us today. I want to focus on a zero-cost initiative in the budget, and it's related, to some changes that were made and promoted by the opposition party, and that's to the Red Tape Reduction Act, and specifically sandboxes. Adding red tape is what seemed to happen, and the scope was limited. It went exactly the wrong direction, I think. And I think it's part of a misunderstanding about the purpose of sandboxes. They're there for agility, not for deregulation. It's the purpose is to say, how could we keep up to the changes around us in the world? I want to focus on the Cabinet Directive on Regulation, which allows for incorporation by reference across the government and of consensus-based standards. And there is a Standards Council of Canada consensus-based standard on the design, implementation, evaluation of regulatory sandboxes. So would that provide an ability to move, because we spoke with the Treasury Board officials, and they really described where we're at now as not providing an opportunity for us to implement sandboxes in areas that are most innovative, because it's limited to one department, one minister, and it doesn't allow us, with a lot of innovations that cut across those silos, to move ahead. So I'm just wondering, with further cuts to the public service imminent, I would think, based on our financial situation, and limited capacity in our regulators to keep up with these changes in traditional means, would this opportunity of using the Cabinet Directive on regulation and incorporating standards by reference allow for a broader use of sandboxes? Again, controlled. This is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. This is, so I'll hand it over to you.
So happy, Senator Deakin. Maybe a member of the opposition would think that I've asked you to ask the question. I am so happy. No, because you speak the truth. I mean, honestly, we were just updating Canada to the international standards, and that has become something. I hope that when the Council of Canadian Innovators and others have questioned, they will ask the opposition why, when we were trying to reduce red tape, I would say we have added a number of rules now that will make a very discrete tool in the toolbox now with many more caveats, I would say. And at the time, this was asked from the government because they said, if we don't do it here, by the way, we'll do it somewhere else. So rather do it here, because there was a question about promoting Canadian companies and scaling. Now, I have to accept we're a minority parliament. The House has spoken. We've added a number of rules around them that are going to make the use of that, I think, certainly less attractive, because there's a lot of things to go through. That being said, that's the will of the House. So, people will have to adjust to the reality. But you're right. I mean, we had really limited the tool to environmental innovation and financial innovation. So that was already very, very, very limited in terms of the use of that. And we had tried to use really best practices we've seen in other OECD countries. Now, the opposition deemed appropriate to add additional guardrails, report to parliaments and others. I respect that. This is where we are. But I think if there's some explaining to do, they'll have to go to the opposition to see what was their wisdom at the time when they wanted to put all of that. Some of the guardrails I would certainly subscribe are warranted. Some others will make it more cumbersome than perhaps we had anticipated initially. But this is the nature of where we are today, but certainly will.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Senator McAdam.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here this morning. So I've been asking officials coming before this committee for a number of years about a comprehensive review of the tax system. And a comprehensive review has not happened in decades. Budget 2025 does not include a commitment to a more comprehensive review. And also the government promised, as part of its election, to have an expert review of the corporate tax system. So, but it's also absent from the budget. And in a report last week, the C.D. Howe Institute actually argues that Canada needs a much broader and more comprehensive tax reform effort. So I'm wondering if you could speak to this and just in terms of any plans the government might have to look at a comprehensive review or comprehensive tax reform.
Well, thank you very much. It's a very, very important question. I mean, we have started to look at removing a number of boutique tax credit, as I would describe them, to try to make the tax code more simple. It is a worthwhile endeavor. I would just say with the state of the world as we speak, there are a number of priorities we need to address in the level of uncertainty and complexity that we see in the world today, that we need to focus on certainly building resiliency. You've seen the recent events of the last few days. There's a lot of things going on at the same time. It is certainly a goal, but when you're in government, it's all about focus, priority, and execution. So I would say for now, we've been very focused on building the strongest economy in the G7, ensuring the sovereignty of Canada, making sure that we would be resilient whatever may happen in the world, because as the Prime Minister said, let's focus on what we can control, build one Canadian economy, removing interprovincial barriers, having project of national interest. So on one end, it's a goal. On the other end, you would appreciate as Minister of Finance, I need to be in sync with everything that's happening in the world and make sure we focus and prioritize the work we have to do to empower Canadian, protect Canadian, and build the Canadian economy.
Don't you think, tax reform in and of itself contributes to, or could contribute to, a stronger economy, a more resilient economy? Like to me, it all goes together. But I do agree it's a large project. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, your point is very valid. I would say yes. The challenge is in the very complex and uncertain and fast-changing world. We have a number of priorities that we need to address in order to make Canada resilient. Like I said, it's still a goal. The question is about focus and priorities, and I think the events of the last few days have just shown that for any G7 minister these days, every day is something that we need to look at the state of the world, work together to make sure that we provide the stability, the confidence to consumer and investors, and make sure we take structural steps together to ensure that not only our domestic economy but the world economy will be fine. And that's.
Another quick question.
30 seconds.
Okay. So a recent report by the International Monetary Fund was supportive of your government's move toward higher public investment, but also said a clear debt to GDP anchor should remain central to Canada's fiscal framework, and it's not there. So can you just tell me why you've dropped that as one of the fiscal anchors of government?
I'm happy that you refer to the IMF report. I think they praise Canada time and time again with respect to our fiscal capacity and our discipline. I would say we have fiscal anchors that are in the budget, and I would say even former parliamentary budget officers have said that balancing revenues with operating revenues with expenses is a very significant anchor by itself. And the fact that we're spending less to invest more, I think, is giving market confidence that Canada is on the right track.
Merci beaucoup, Sénatrice Oudard.
Thank you, Senator Oudard. Thank you, Chair. Welcome, Minister. I'm very pleased to welcome you here. And we're speaking about something that we're both interested, the strategy of Driver Inc. I believe that you have fought very hard for this, and I'd like to thank you for the statements that you made just before Christmas. And I hope that changes will take place. I had an opportunity to work on this when I was president of the Forum CNSSET, because thanks to this regime, workers are deprived of social protection. There are drastic consequences for them. In fact, this has been the case for almost 15 years now, because since 2011, the federal government has allowed a breach to occur in the T4A sheet that truck drivers are classified as being self-employed, whereas they are actually employees. The result was a lack of training, an increase in accidents. Workers who were not qualified, they did not benefit from any social protection. I believe that you're fully aware of this, and I would like to thank you for what you have done, and for your statements, and in fact for the allocation of millions to this. You spoke about some 67 million over 4 years and 10 million per year to fight against this particular strategy. Now I'd like to speak to the issue of retroactivity as well, because what will take place? I understand what is going to occur in the future. They can no longer be categorized in the same way. But as to the past, do you intend to go back all the way to 2011? And will there be the tax limitation be limited? Because will these companies no longer be able to bid on public contracts? So I'd like to here you speak to the consequence. And we're speaking about the future, but I'd also like to go back to what happened the last 15 years. And we want to speak about workers because we did not mention these. I'd like to hear you speak about the companies, but especially about the companies. I'm listening to you, but I'm also looking towards the chair. I am listening to your questions. I'm wondering if I have enough time. I was doing two things at once. First of all, thank you very much for raising this issue. It's an issue of public safety. As you know, when we speak about public safety, we have to act in a firm and rapid fashion, as we've done. As to when it comes to extortion, we saw that recently in another case, but we acted decisively and quickly. I would say that this is a scourge that we had to end. We did the work that we could with CRA in order to settle this issue. And there was a moratorium imposed, at least from what I understand at the time, which led to very unfortunate consequences. And it was important to change this, as we've done. And regarding from a tax perspective, and Madam Senator, I'd like us to come back to you in writing, if we may, because you'll understand that people are listening to us at home want to understand this clearly. And when it comes to tax matters, we always have to be very accurate. And I appreciate that, as you know. I'd like to come back to you in writing, specifically to give you a specific answer to the questions that you raised, and also to provide clarity to the employees and the operators in the field so that they have this in writing, and this could be tabled with the committee. You can table it on our website, of the committee's website. You have 9 seconds left. You no longer have any time. I understand. Unfortunately, you no longer have any time. Really sorry. Senator Sibel, thank you very much, Minister, for being with us. I think the economist I am can only welcome the efforts made by the government to strengthen the Canadian government. And I believe that we are heading in the right direction on a number of levels. But I'd like to come back to the issue of sandboxes. I do understand that amendments were brought that put in place the guardrails. As you mentioned, perhaps we had a very large sandbox that was closer to a beach, or we've moved closer to something more restrictive. But we've also restricted the sandboxes to two sectors, that is green technologies and the financial one. I feel now that we're more in a sand bucket rather than in a sandbox. You're back from the G7. You mentioned the OCDE countries who also have these systems in place. My fear is that a number of sectors are strategic in Canada right now, defense, as was mentioned, as well mining, mineral exploration, as well as energy. Do you believe the fact that we are so limited in the scope of this particular provision will not undermine our ability to attract investments and will undermine our competitiveness at the time where there is a crucial need to be agile in these strategic sectors for Canada? Madam Senator, you said it all. You said a great deal of what I believe in. And it is true. Is due to the current situations we had to do this. These were amendments, and in a minority government, it is important to come to a compromise. As you said, we've had to limit the scope. And that is why I was surprised to see the public debate around this issue. And it's rare, Mr. Chair, that I give myself the opportunity of perhaps offering studies to the Senate committee, but perhaps the Senate should undertake a study. We saw this was seen in the public space as being a new measure, something that is unique to Canada. And very frankly speaking, on the international levels, my colleagues were quite surprised because we didn't invent hot water. This has been in place for many years. It exists in most of the OCDE countries. It exists in G7 countries. This is a measure that fosters innovation for SMEs. We had to limit it. You're correct in saying so. We had to put in place many limits, many boundaries, because that was requested by the opposition. And given the current situation, we needed to move forward. But I think even for you in the Senate and Mr. Chair, perhaps it would be a good idea to do a joint study with the House. You're speaking about hot water. Don't ask us to do a study on hot water. No, but maybe we could come to an agreement that is lukewarm water. The water might be a little bit hot, so maybe we should see how the other countries go about doing this and as a source of inspiration. Thank you. And I'd like to know whether or not you have assessed what the possible impacts would be when it comes to our country being less attractive for investments in the future. This is very real. It is very tangible. We need investments for infrastructures. We need them for energy sources and so on and so forth. Do you have studies to that effect? Well, thank you very much, Senator. I'm looking at a list of the European countries, Korea, Brazil, Colombia, Singapore, Germany, UK, the Mauritius. They also have frameworks in place to frame this. We have established a framework, but as you've indicated, it is quite limited in the spirit of the act, as the chair indicated. As I said, it isn't new, and I think perhaps it was perceived by the public as being new. And that's where I said that we have tried to modernize the Canadian framework because, as you've so well expressed, Senator, if we don't do this here, it'll be done elsewhere. I have a list of countries where this is in place. So, Chair, perhaps it might be an idea to conduct a joint study with the House to see whether or not we can do this in a calm, serious, reasonable fashion, to see what is put in place elsewhere and to debunk the myths of this issue, which I think has taken on quite unique proportions in Canada and is quite different from what we see in other G7 countries. Minister, you're looking money everywhere. We saw that you have visited alongside the Prime Minister areas like Sydney, Tokyo. You mentioned funds in Australia. I think you should go to Medillo in Ottawa. This is the Canada Pension Plan. They have $750 billion and only 13% invested here in Canada. It's on Sherbrooke in Montreal. PSP, which is a Crown corporation, $300 billion. 20% only invested in Canada. Don't you believe that it is such a good thing to invest in Canada, as we're all persuaded it is? Don't you think that Canadian pensioners should be able to benefit from these exceptional returns? Senator, no doubt people listening to you this morning, and I think that they'll be very interested in your remarks. I think the situation has changed in the country. I think the fact that the tone has changed. That is, the Prime Minister was clear that we're building new projects. We're also implementing a major projects office. Minister, I do understand your answer. You don't intend to force the pension funds to invest in Canada. You don't intend to put in place limits or incentives to incite them more strongly to invest in Canada. What I'm saying is that the pension funds see this themselves. In light of the discussions I've had, they see the interest of investing more in Canada. And I was with them, and it is one of the very first times, to my knowledge at least, that we had the Super Nines, or the Maple, and the Maple late to nines, as we call them here in English. We had representatives from the Caisse as well who were with us. And I think that the world is discovering this interest because we have stability, predictability, we have rule of law. I think that we have this major projects office now. And one of the issues, and I'm trying to be brief, but the idea is that Canada had to develop the project list. In Australia, for a long time, has a project list in place for the various provinces of the states in their federal state, and it allows for clarity and transparency. They want to know what the funds are, they want to know what the projects are. So it's not only about Canadian funds, but there are Australian funds as well. There's also different types of funds. I think there is strong interest in Canada. So another question, the high-speed rail project. If you look at the trajectory of the high-speed rail, it moves right through your own riding. Saint-Handicap, Champlain, Batisca, Saint-Pointe-la-Parine. And these people no longer have any recourse. So your bill is actually removing a recourse that the transportation company had. And it also removes rights from those who will be expropriated to build the project. You forgot Trois-Rivières. No, but that's in my writing. It's a St. Martin sector. No, but Trois-Rivières is one of my districts. I'm also the member for Trois-Rivières. I'm one of the members. And people are very happy about this. I've been in politics for 10 years. This has been asked for 10 years. Now we're delivering. Now, you're speaking about the others. I think that we have modernized the Act. But we looked at what is taking place in Quebec. You looked at the current provisions tabled under C-15, modernized the framework. And this was a source of inspiration. We looked at the best practices provincially. What about the Transportation Office? Well, it's in the spirit of modernizing the legislation and to be harmonized with what is already taking place in Quebec and where your electors informed. I would say, Mr. Chair, that at every meeting there's competition for us to build a high-speed trail that stops in Trois-Rivières, and that's been the #1 priority from the Chamber of Commerce since I began back in 2015. It was well underway before that. So I think that people, with all due respect, want this. But I think the major step forward that we've made, that is you and I almost, we've been successful in landing, or rather having the train move through Trois-Rivières. And at the time, that was not necessarily a done deal, but that's a major achievement for the area of Mauricie Centre, Quebec. Thank you very much. Do we have any time left? I'm here with you. It would be my pleasure. So Senator Sabak and then Senator Enkel, you have 2 minutes each.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it. Minister, welcome back. Always pleased to see you with us. My question relates to your plan to reduce the deficit. If I read it right, the budget projects that the federal government deficit will decline from $78 billion in 2025-2026 to $56.6 billion in 2029 to 2023 to 2030. So what are the main measures in Bill C-15 that will reduce the deficit over the next 4 years in terms of both spending and revenue?
Thank you very much. I saw music, so I thought people were happy about the budget projection. Senator, I took that. I saw Senator Forêt was so eager and enthusiastic about the budget. No, I want to say thank you. I mean, it's 2 things. It's spending less and investing more. We've been very clear that we needed to put the house in order, and I think Canadians expect that. I mean, Canadians have been tightening their belt for quite some time, and they expect the federal government to do the same. The exercise we did to find the $60 billion of savings is very serious. I mean, we've done that in 6 months, and I think we have a table which compared that to Prime Minister Harper at the time and Prime Minister Chrétien, and you could see the scale of what we're doing is both ambitious but also serious. We need to put the house in order, and we had the compounded annual growth rate of some of the program was not sustainable. So we have to bring that back to a more sustainable level. That's one thing. The other thing is to generate growth. That's why this is an investment budget. We say that the investments we're planning in the budget will result in $1 trillion of investment. And coming back from a mission with the Prime Minister around the world, I can see why the world is interested in Canada. I can just tell you, even in my G7 calls, when you look at the events of the world today, Canada is seen as a very stable, predictable energy supplier to the world. I won't tell the countries, but even this morning, some were texting me and say, can we have more online in terms of resources? Because now, with the challenge, the geopolitical challenge, you might expect that if you can export from the East Coast or the West Coast, there's a lot of interest in our natural resources.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, thank you for being with us. I have 2 questions. I hope that you will be able to provide a brief response. My first question is, in 2025, fraudsters were able to get over $775 billion from Canada, according to the Census Bureau, and this is through bank transfers or payments. Now, today, and that is what bothers me, Canada is being seen as being the El Dorado for fraud. So during the pre-meeting regarding Bill C-15 at our banking committee, we believe that Section 16's provisions are entirely insufficient in that regard. But it continues to put most of the responsibilities on consumers. So despite all of the concerns raised there, why is there no a single substantial amendment that has been made during the study of this legislation at the House of Commons? Why is it? Why is it that the government is not addressing this problem more firmly? And how can it justify the maintaining such a limited framework, whereas this is a major national issue? It is also an issue of major national well-being. Senator, I take this very serious, and thank you for shedding light on this. As you saw, in extortion, we have taken measures that are solid and robust and quick. It is one aspect. However, there's also the Financial Crimes Agency that we put in place. I insisted that this be put together quickly. You're correct. We need to have more tools in our toolbox in order to fight against money laundering, against extortion, and terrorist financing. And we have to ensure that at the same time we protect Canadians. And often it is the most vulnerable populations that are affected. And that is what you saw. I made an announcement on extortion. That's the beginning. The agency fighting against financial crimes will give us more tools in our toolbox so that we can fight against this. It has different forms. And I think that we did have meetings with the American Treasury, with the FBI, and the financial agency in Italy to obtain more information, to have at least one of the agencies that will be able to protect citizens and consumers, but that at the same time it can fight crime. Something quickly could be done. Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you for your generosity. I apologize, and I am rarely as stringent as I am today in order to interrupt you. But given that everybody was asking questions and we tried to be on time, we only had an hour, you gave us an additional 5 minutes. So thank you very much. It's always a pleasure. And this concludes the committee. We will come back tomorrow at 6:55.